cities had been touched by war.
In spite of the number of men in uniform in the streets, the general indifference to and ignorance about the war was remarkable. The universal catchphrase was, "Business as usual."
Against this background of business as usual, Lloyd George toured the country to see conditions for himself and to drive forward the industrial revolution which would give the troops the shells and guns they needed. He used all his personal magic, all his ruthlessness.
In 1915, I drove Mr. Lloyd George, when he was Minister of Munitions, on his munition tour of Wales, going from town to town. And when we arrived at Newport in Monmouthshire, just as he got out of the car, someone in the crowd shouted out, "Why don't you send out some guns?" Instantly he replied, "Why don't you come and help?"
While Lloyd George was touring the country, inspecting, persuading, energizing, the mood of the British was changing. They were becoming grimmer, more bitterly resolved to strike Germany down, no matter what the cost. The violence of war had begun to touch them, too. On May the 7th, Britain had been stunned by the news that the great liner, Lusitania, had been torpedoed and sunk with the loss of over 1,000 lives. Then the survivors arrived at Liverpool with stories of the ship's last moments.
There was a dull, thud-like, not very loud, but unmistakable explosion. As I ran up the stairs, the boat was already heeling over. Just after I reached the deck, a stream of steerage passengers came rushing up from below and fought their way into the boat nearest us. They were white-faced and terrified. I think they were shrieking. There was no kind of order. The strongest got there first. The weak were pushed aside. No children could have lived in that throng.
A mass grave was dug for the victims in the Irish town of Cork, and indignation at this apparent act of German frightfulness flared across the country. There was another side to the story. The ship was carrying a small consignment of rifles and shrapnel shells, and her captain had ignored Admiralty instructions on how to avoid known dangers. The German government had advertised in the New York papers that passengers traveled at their own risk. Nevertheless, anti-German riots exploded in the big industrial towns. Any shop with a German-sounding name was good for looting and smashing.
Groups began to form, and somebody rushed round and said Keppel's pork butcher's shop had been broken into by a crowd of women and all the eatables stolen. Well, I happened to be walking down this street, and from nowhere came a great rush of women in clogs and shawls and stood outside this draper's shop, shouting and shaking their fists. And an old woman stepped forward out of the crowd and threw a tin can at the window. Well, it bounced off harmlessly, and that might have been a signal of command. The other women threw their shawls back, produced half bricks that they'd been concealing under there, and a fusillade of these missiles crashed into the window.
Not even women were spared.
A frightened German woman came out into the street, eager to get away unnoticed. Her nervousness attracted attention. Harpies jeered at her, tweaked at her hat, grabbed at her purse.
Air raids sharpened the bitter hatred of the home fronts towards the enemy. For the first time in history, bombing from the air placed under fire the populations of cities far from the battlefield. Women and children were being killed, French, German, and now British. The Zeppelins first came to England on the 19th of January, 1915. On the 31st of May, they bombed London, capital of the empire, for the first time. Behind their indiscriminate progress, the raiders left homes wrecked, lives shattered. The word non-combatant had lost its meaning. The rage against Germans mounted, even those who were long naturalized British subjects. A hate campaign was deliberately worked up by John Bull, the magazine with the largest circulation in the country.
By this time, we begin to know our Hun. The Hun is always the same. Yes, always the true son of Cain, the man of blood. Though his skin is white, his heart is black. Every employee of the state, in government or in the services, of German birth or parentage, should be forced to resign. The innocent must suffer with the guilty.
In every country at war, hatred like this seemed natural, even reasonable. The enemy was portrayed as an ogre of horrifying monstrosity, or as a discomfited clown. Dark neuroses lurked beneath the surface of civilian patriotism. Yet the patriotism was real enough. It inflamed the hearts of women as well as men. Some of its manifestations were unpleasantly hysterical. There were women who felt it their duty to force men into the services by every device of scorn and blackmail.
I went to the music hall in civilian clothes on my leave, and whilst lined up outside, a lady come along, and about 35, and put a white feather into my hand. I looked at it, felt very disgusted, and there wasn't much I could do about it.
As well as being given white feathers, there was another method of approach. You would see a girl coming towards you with a delightful smile all over her face, and you'd think to yourself, my word, this is somebody who knows me. When she got to about 5 or 6 paces from you, she would suddenly freeze up and walk past you with a look of utter contempt and scorn. If she could have spat, she would have spat. She just did not do that. And that was far more hurtful than a white feather, because it made you curl up completely, and there was no reply because she walked on.
Thousands of other women found their patriotic outlet in Lloyd George's munitions program.
These girls were drawn from domestic service, mills, and shops mostly. A lot of very young girls there, and young married women who had come principally to help keep their homes together when their husbands were away, and also many of them felt that they were helping the war effort very much.
In Britain, more and more women took over from men as this industrial revolution gathered speed. By the end of 1915, there were 73 national munitions factories, as well as the armaments firms and all the privately owned industries converted to war work. American machines and British improvisation were the tools with which Lloyd George achieved success. The skilled craftsman gave way to the machine minder. Victorian methods gave way to mass production.
In the closing months of 1915, the national factories' combined output was 200,000 shells, nearly all of the lighter natures. In the following year, 1916, their total output was nearly 7 million, more than half of which was medium and heavy shell.
Not only in munitions did women take over more and more jobs that had always been traditionally a man's. They repaired gas holders. They shoveled coal into the retorts that made the gas. Heavy work, hot and dirty.